Good evening and welcome to tonight's Shir. Today is Thursday of Parshas Re'eh, and I want to start off. Whilst I was waiting for 8:30, I looked in today's Rambam, and it's talking about the various mumin, deformities or blemishes, which would disqualify a kohen. And in Perik Ches of Hilchos Bias Mikdash Halacha Zayin, it says if a person's nose is recessed, even if he cannot paint both eyes in once, he's called a Baal Mum. Now, this reminds me of what I heard from Reb Mendel Futafas about there was someone by the name of Reb Peretz Chaim, and Reb Peretz had the unique privilege to have seen the Alter Rebbe as a young child, and he lived to see the Frierdiker Rebbe in the crib, in the cot. So it's about 80. He was in his 80s when he passed away, and he saw 6 Rebbes. So when he was a young child, this Reb Peretz, he stayed in a home. Well, apparently he came from Germany and was hosted by a family somewhere in Russia, White Russia, and they were a wealthy family. And whenever the Alter Rebbe would pass through that town, he would stay in their house, in this house. And they had a room designated just for the Rebbe. So they had a room in the house just for the Rebbe. In this room, they also, however, kept the utensils for Pesach. So there were high shelves in this room, and there were large copper, as Mendel told me, the large copper pots on the shelves, on this high up shelf. And so Reb Peretz was 8 years old, 9 years old, whatever. So he was curious to see the Alter Rebbe's Hanhogas, Alter Rebbe's conduct inside the room. So he somehow managed to climb up and hide behind those pots on the shelf. And he was able to observe the Alter Rebbe. And he said a few things. Number one, the Alter Rebbe was not necessarily tall, but broad-shouldered. He had like a bulge on the back of his head, like a level bread, like a loaf of bread. Now, in that context, Reb Mendel also said how the Alter Rebbe had a recess by the top of his nose, and there's this halacha which we just said about koichel shtei einav ka'achas, to be able to take a brush and to brush both eyes with color in one uninterrupted move. So that's mentioned in Hilchos Mum, and the Alter Rebbe had this thing. There's a story with the Alter Rebbe that when he was a Talmud by the Maggid, he had some kind of illness, and it was some kind of worm on the brain. And the doctor said that the only way they could remove it was to remove the nose. And he asked the Maggid, and the Maggid said that's not acceptable. So then they came up with an alternative that they will be able to remove the bone inside the nose. In that way, they will be able to get to the brain to be able to remove this worm, and that was successful. So the Alter Rebbe was the Lashon Keichel Shtei Einav Ka'achas, and when the portrait of the Alter Rebbe became available, this was one of the ways of confirming that it was genuine, because somehow you could recognize this feature on the picture. What we have is obviously a picture of a picture. Apparently, in the original, it was very noticeable. The other things which he said were that the Alter Rebbe would daven exactly. It took him 2 hours. It took him a half an hour from the beginning of davening until Birchas Krishma. Birchas Krishma and Shemona Esrei was an hour, and from there till the end of davening was another half an hour. This was he evidently saw this a few days, and so he was able to observe the Alter Rebbe. And then after this, they would bring into the Alter Rebbe a bowl of some kind of kasha, and the Alter Rebbe would have 5 or 6 spoons of this kasha, and that was his food for the day, and that he went on with his day's learning. So Reb Mendel was very close to Reb Meir Simcha Chaim in Neville. Reb Meir Simcha was a grandson of this Reb Peretz, so Reb Mendel would kind of say he's like 3 steps removed. He got from Reb Meir Simcha from Reb Peretz, and Reb Peretz from the Alter Rebbe. All right, just reminded me of this just from today's Rambam. Right, let's go into the list of points which we have for today. And this is behemshech to our discussion about when we had about around Tisha B'Av, where it says it's not our custom to sleep on the floor. And I raised the point that possibly not just on Tisha B'Av, there's a general objection to sleeping on the floor. And there's a Gemara in Broches which says, "Al kol mishkav tishkav v'al tishkav ala karaka." Broches of Samach base on his base. So there were a few Rabbi last Friday, Rabbi Avram Kievman from Liverpool sent me that from the Rambam, which we were learning on Gimel Prochim L'Yoim, last Friday, it says that the Koyanim would sleep al ha'aretz. So this, as you can see in Perek Ches Halacha Zayin, it talks about the Kohanim not sleeping in their uniforms, which were allocated from the Mikdash, from the Beis Hamikdash, how do you say, wardrobe. And when it came to go to sleep, Beloshim Bigdei Atzmon, they would put on their own clothes, V'yeshenim al ha'aretz, and they would sleep on the floor. And the Rambam adds, Kederech kol shemrei chatzeres hamalochim, as would be the practice of sentries on royal courts, shlo yishnu ala mitos, they wouldn't sleep on beds. Okay, so Rabbi Kievman pointed out that here you see that the Kohanim would sleep on the floor. So now the source of this halacha, this fact, is in the Mishnah in Tomid and in Midas. The same Mishnah appears in Mishnah's Tomid, Perek Aleph, and in Midas, also Perek Aleph. And it talks about the Beis HaMoiked, which was a large chamber on the north side of the courtyard. And it says it had Mukaf Rovdin Shel Even. It was large slabs of stone. It was like amphitheater style, perhaps. Vezikni bis av yeshenim sham. The elders of the family who were on duty that day, they would sleep on these raised slabs. And they were keeping the keys to the courtyard. The young Koyanim, ish kistoi ba'aretz. Each one, now the way it's in the Rambam's version, it's ish kesusoi ba'aretz. Each one had his garment on the ground, which would mean he slept in his own clothes on the floor. Tosfos in Avodah Zarah reads the word not kesusoi, but kistoi. And we have the word kar and keses. And the Tosfos in Avodah Zarah, Daf Samech Hey, is discussing this. There's two words which seem to be, people mix them up, of kar and keses, both meaning some kind of cushion. And Tosfos insists that keses is the cushion and kar is the mattress. And some people go, he says, some mix it up. And meanwhile, Tosfos does refer to this Mishnah of Ish Kistoi Ba'aretz. So Tosfos is obviously reading that the word Kistoi does not mean not Kesusoi, but Kistoi as in his cushion. And so he would have his cushion on the floor. Now, so we have here two ways of reading this Mishnah, and curiously, the Rambam has read the word kesusoi, And then he's skipped that word of kasos altogether. He could have said Yishenim al ha'oretz big. Well, he said big day atzmon. So this is how the Rambam is on him shut. V'leivshim big day atzmon, and that's pshat ish kasusoi. Ba'oretz is stepped to the ground wearing their clothes. Whereas if it's the word it's read kistoi, that means they would put down some kind of mattress of sort, some kind of cushion between themselves and the ground. What we do see is that Rambam sees this as possibly as part of the kovod of the Beis Hamikdash. The fact that the sentries sleep on the ground rather than shelo yishnu ala mitos. There's another Girsa in Rambam, v'lo yishnu ala mitos. So really sleeping in a comfortable bed would be not respectful. So you come to sleep here, you come to be on guard. Okay, so you're taking turns, but to sleep on a comfortable bed wouldn't be appropriate. So what we're seeing is that, yes, the Rambam says Yoshenim ala oretz, but there are those who would say that it's they slept with some kind of cushion, some kind of mattress. And you can see here the Tiferes Yisrael, in that Mishnah, he says when they went to sleep, they put their own garment on the floor rather than using the big day kahuna to use as a mattress. That would not be acceptable for two reasons: whether it's be correct to use something which is holy for mundane, for an indulgence, also because they were included shatnez. The Gemara talks about this in that Gemara in Avodah Zarah, that the big day kahuna included shatnez, and therefore they wouldn't be allowed to sleep on them because they're not allowed to sleep on shatnez. All right, so that's the Rambam vis-a-vis the way it is in the Mishnah. So there's two ways of reading this. And now about the not sleeping on the floor, not sitting on the floor. So here you have there's a well-known thing about not, even when Tisha B'Av or Avedas Islam, not to sit mamish on the floor. So the source for this, you can see here, the Sharet Shuvah quotes from the Birkei Yosef, from the Chidor, and he says that one should have an interruption. This is in Tov Kuf Nun Beis. You should have a hefsek between yourself and the ground, al pi Kabbalah. One shouldn't sit on the ground even with clothes. Only should be something that besides your own clothes, there should be something else interrupting between yourself and the ground. Now he quotes this from a Sefer Merab Shmuel Shar Arya Bechidusho. This is what the Chidor writes. The Chidor lived in the times of the Alter Rebbe, perhaps. I'm in the middle of a shir now. I'll be free at 9:30. What's curious is I could not find this Sefer Shar Aryeh, and so I'm intrigued what is the Kabbalah reason for having an interruption. And then he brings from the Maril, who seems to be not so worried about this. And then he says that possibly when the Reb Shmuel says not to sit on this in the Kaf HaChaim, when this Reb Shmuel Shar Aryeh says you shouldn't sit on the ground, means mamish when it's mamish on the soil. But if it's got a stone floor, that's not a problem. And so then we're going back to when the Rambam says that they slept on the ground, and and then we said the Gemara says not to sleep on the ground. So the Gemara is talking about ala karka, on soil, whereas perhaps the Beis Hamoiked had a stone floor, and therefore that concern doesn't apply. So it's not so clear. Okay, just someone raised this point, and okay. So the Rambam Taka says al ha'oretz, but that is, in looking in the Mishnah, it's not so clear cut. Let's move on. Brocha chroino for chocolate wafers. And so, some people have these problems. How many wafers will make up for brocha chroino? Most of us don't have a problem. You have a suffix, eat another wafer. Problem solved. But if you are very careful how many wafers you intend to have, so you're asking, what is the shear? Now, the shear for kazayis is it's not a shear in weight, it's a shear in volume. They used to say that a matchbox is about the shear of a kazayas. That's in the days when matchboxes were made of wood rather than carton, and they were about, I think, 3 millimeters thicker. Okay, so 3, 4 wafers will be for sure more than that kind of kazayas. The question is, though, what about the fact that a significant part of the mass of the wafer is actually not wafer, but it's chocolate? Now, I emphasize the difference between weight and mass because the wafer is a very lightweight type of bread, but that's not a problem. The pores inside the wafer are also mitzdaref to the shear. That's the Mishnah in Uksin and in Shulchan Aruch and Simatoch Pevov. That a sponge cake, you don't have to squeeze the air out of it. You can be meshire as it is. If it's something like an air kichel, which has got large pockets of air, that's a different story. But if it's a regular, even as it says pas sufgonis, so then mishta eres k'mois shehi. Okay, fine. But the question is, can you combine also the chocolate layers, which are between this, let's say there's 5 layers of wafer and 4 layers of cream in between. Do they combine to the sheer kazayas? Before we get to that, we have another question, which I've perhaps discussed in the past, and that is, any cake has got, in addition to flour, it's got in it sugar, and it may have some other ingredients. Do those ingredients, if you have only mamash kazayas of the cake, now 25% or 30% of that kazayas is not even flour. Does that make any difference? So here we have from the Alter Rebbe's Seder Birchas Hanen, where he says that we have this Gemara in Brochus, which says that the dogon, the grain, is always considered the Iker, even if the majority of that mass is honey or other ingredients, and it's only a minority is grain, flour. It doesn't matter, and even if you say it's really more sweet than a food for to give you nourishment, etc., to fulfill you, still the grain remains the dominant feature. To quote the Lashon Gemara, "Salkadaita chamino duv she'ikel, kamash balon kim she'ikel." You might have thought that the honey is the main component because that's, well, that's possibly the majority, and they might, while you're having it as a treat, kamash balon kim she'ikel. No, the grain element remains the dominant feature. And then, therefore, he says, not only that, but also the brocha achas me'en sholish. You'll say al hamichya for this food. So kazayas of this food seems to be mezonos and al hamichya. Then in the next paragraph, he says, not everyone is so confident about the brocha achroina. There are those who say you cannot say a brocha achroina with this combination unless the ratio is a kazayis to kedei achilas pras, which is about 1 to 6, 1 to 5, whatever you want to spell it out. Well, that if it's that ratio, then the mezonos, the flour ingredient, dominates the mixture, and it is mezonos, and it is al hamichya. If the flour element is, let's say, 1 to 7 or 1 to 8, etc., it's still mezonos. But for al hamichya, you cannot say al hamichya according to the second opinion. And you're now in a dilemma. What bracha after bracha do you say? So according to this, something like chocolate brownies, even, which have got, let's say, half of it is flour, even if it's a third is flour, it's mezonos and al hamichya without a problem. Right, now that is so far when the sugar, etc., is mixed into the dough. But what happens if it is something like cheesecake or strudel, where the other element is very recognizable? It's not mixed in, it's like there's a pocket which has got, I don't know, mashed apples, whatever it may be, to make it into a strudel. So there's the pastry on the outside, and then you've got the filling. Does that make up your shear or not? And the same thing would be in the case of the wafers, because they're not, well, they're baked as wafers, and then they somehow put the cream, and then they cut them to size, etc. Or for that matter, if you had a chocolate coated wafer, so the chocolate on the outside, it's not an indigenous part of the dough. So do those other elements make up the shear? And here Reb Shlomo Zalman in Minchas Shlomo, he uh, he questions that. Now he does refer to the Mishnah Berurah, and on the Mishnah Berurah you can see on the left of the screen where the Mishnah Berurah in Siman Ches Sifkotan Mem Gimel, he's taking the view that you'd have to, in order to make ala michya, you'd have to have enough of that pastry that you had actually a kazayas of grain. And here Reb Shlomo Zalman says that's what his discussion has been according to the Mishnah Berurah, but according to, he's been pointed out to that according to the Alter Rebbe Shulchan in several places, he says so long as there's a kazayas ratio within Kriyachias Pras, even if you eat only a kazayas of the mixture, you'd say al hamichya. So that is true. But that I still feel that doesn't answer his initial question, because the Alter Rebbe is machadish, all right, fine, that the grain in the mixture, it dominates the mixture, and it all becomes mazonos. It's upgraded, so the sugar becomes mazonos, and therefore it's al hamichya. But what about the filling? Yes, it's true. You don't make a separate brocha on the filling of the strudel, but because it's so noticeable as a separate element, does it become mazonos to the point that you can make an al hamichya on a piece of strudel, including the fill? I don't think that's clear from the Alter Rebbe, and so that still remains an unclear point. Now, one last point before we finish off with this is that there is a shtickle problem here, that in Perik Gimel, this is where you're seeing the Alter Rebbe says if there's a kazayis, if there's a ratio of 1/6 of this food is a grain, then it's al hamichya. Contrary to Mishnah Berurah, it says that you have to have a kazayis of grain within that mixture, which means you have to eat several kazesim, or 2 kazesim, let's say, in order to have a kazayis of grain. Okay. In Perik Ches, in Berchos Hanen, the Alter Rebbe seems to be saying similar to what the Mishnah Berurah says, that there is a reason to say that you'd have to have a kazayis of the actual grain and not a kazayis of the food which has 1/6 of it is grain. It's at first I used to think that it used to be that is a contradiction, but later I came to the recognition that there is talking about a different type of mixture. So again, here in Perek Gimel, the Alter Rebbe is talking about a combination of flour and honey. In Perek Ches, is talking about a mixture of kemach dogon and kemach kitnius, flour of grain and flour from beans, let's say. So you've got 2 flours, and they are now blended into one mixture. Here, although I've quoted a Gemara, you might have thought that the dvash, the duvshe kamash malon, kimche that the main thing. That's true. When there is should we say, a struggle between honey and flour, so the Gemara says flour dominates. Right? That doesn't necessarily mean that there's a flour and another type of flour, that the flour which is a chameshes minidogon dominates the other flour. It's a different type of struggle. This is a struggle of 2 totally different flavors, different, this is a sweetener and this is a carb. So those things, we're going to say the carb is the main thing. But when you've got carb and carb, you've got this flour and that flour, it's not evident that we don't have a raya from the Gemara that the Hameshis Minadogon are more sacred, that they should dominate the others. And as a result, there, when it's a combination of two types of flour, the Alter Rebbe says you should be machmir to have a kazais of dogon, and otherwise if you don't have a kazais of dogon, the kemach of the kidneys of the pulses may not make up the shear. So I don't see it as a contradiction. So all right. So meanwhile, to summarize, what happens with the chocolate wafers? So you should have a point of having enough wafers that, let's say, 3 or 4 pieces of wafers. For sure, you've had a kazayas of the pastry alone. There is in one safe I saw that the chocolate, which is mixed in, which is in between, is sometimes put in also mashed flour to kind of mix with that chocolate. But that's something which has to be fact checked before becoming, a reliable halacha. So it's not good enough to say, I heard that someone says, that doesn't, not convinced with that. Okay, let's move on to the next thing. Okay, we've had something similar a couple of years ago, but here a girl called me up this week. She has a hoodie. This is a very Jewish type of garment. Ish Yehudi Hoya B'Shushan Habira. So she has this hoodie sweater, and it's got on it written a logo of some sort. I think she said fear God or something like that. It's written G-O-D. And she's asking, is it okay to wear this garment, this hoodie? So we've got here 2 questions. Number 1, is G-O-D written on something? Is that sacred? And number 2, if it is sacred, does it mean that therefore you can't use the garment? These are 2 separate questions. So let's deal with first the holiness of Hashem's name written in other languages. So here we have in the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch, and he talks about Shemes HaMiyuchodim, names which are clearly attributed and indicating you're talking about Hashem, and they are the 7 names. In other words, you have names which refer to Hashem as the merciful. Well, Rachum can also be a person, as a parent, can also be merciful. So that's not Miyuchodim. But the names of Yudke Vavke, Shin Dalad Yud, Tzvois, etc., these are named Hashem as Miyuchodim. And so we're not allowed to mention them, even Beloshin Chayil, which means even in a other language. So he goes into detail. A name which Hashem is known, people refer to a God in that way. So he says the word God, Gott in Ashkenaz in German, Boga in Polish and Russian. And in other places, I think the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch mentions also Dios, Dioso in Dieu in French, or Dios in Spanish. So to say that not in the context of a prayer would be saying Hashem's name in vain. Now, here's the interesting point. He says, although this name does not have Kedusha in the way it's written, and you're allowed to erase it, but it is still disgraceful if you mention it in an impure place. And that's the context in Nichos Krishma, talking about saying holy things in an impure place. And he says also, if it comes to making an oath and so it would be cursing someone, so it would have validity there. But he says not to mention it in vain. And I do try to impress upon Talmidos. Sometimes I hear them saying, oh my God, really? You're not davening now, so don't use the word God. Find another word. Okay. But here it does say that there's no Kedusha in this written word. He says, you're allowed to erase it. However, we all know that in any Haredish newspaper, when it comes to Hashem's name, G-D, it's written G-D, not G-O-D. And this in the Shulchan Menachem, which is a compilation of Rebbe's letters in Halacha, so it has here Nohagnu Kan, it's one of 3 or 4 quotes there, that we've established here a practice of writing G-D with missing out a letter. And it refers to the Shulchan Aruch, which is which we just read. Fascinating that you've got to hear the Alter Rebbe says, Ein by Kedusha in the written form, and you're allowed to erase it. And then you see the Rebbe says, no, we don't write God because of what is going to get disgraced. And so in a Siddur, when they translate it, it does have God because that's a Siddur. Like you've got Hashem's name in the Hebrew, you've got Hashem's name written in the English. But if it's a piece of literature, which will probably end up in the waste bin, so then we, out of respect for Hashem's name, we write G-D. They shouldn't go to disgrace. And in the notes in the Shulchan Nachem, there's a reference here to Stei Chemed, that encyclopedia, where he says, it brings from a Sefer Pesach Advir and Lekar HaKemach, who are machmir. So the heter in the inside of the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, the Yidati race, is from the Shach, and there are several poskim who oppose this, disagree with the Shach and machmir. So it's very interesting that something which the Alter Rebbe had paskin in Shulchan Aruch that is okay, and yet we don't follow that heter, and we do write G-D out of respect to Hashem's name. And it's not an easy, it's not without a price, because when you're writing something, and people have this problem, if they publish a book and they want to reach a broader readership who are not familiar with Haredish practices, they find, what's this G-D? Who? I remember one fellow, he came, he had come to something, some kind of Shabbaton or something. Who's this Hashim? They're talking about Hashem the whole time. He didn't know who Hashem is. And so some people asked, who's G-D? And so it is confusing. And yet there's an insistence, we write in publications G-D, because of, out of sensitivity to Kedushas Hashem. So now, God, we're going to take the stricter view that it is also to disgrace it. Yeah. So coming back to this young lady with the hoodie, to walk with that hoodie into, let's say, to the bathroom, that would be a problem. We've discussed this in the past. If someone has a piece of jewelry which has got Yud Kei Vav Kei or Shin Dal and Yud, can you go into the bathroom wearing that piece of jewelry, and you have to hide it each time? So that's certainly an issue, and therefore it's not practical and not advisable. Then there's one step further. Does the presence, an inscription of Hashem's name on an article, somehow make that article sacred? So this is, you can see on the screen, from a Sefer Ginzeh HaKodesh, very much a contemporary Sefer, and he says you're not allowed to inscribe Hashem's name on utensils, on cloths. If you did write one of the 7 names of Hashem, which mustn't be erased, on a keli, then you would not be allowed to use that keli, and you'd have to somehow cut off that piece and put it in Geniza, or put the whole piece in Geniza. So now he is talking about in Hebrew. It doesn't say if that's true in another language too. So that goes back to what we saw before. Is there a Kedusha in Hashem's name written in English, God? Does it have a Kedusha, and therefore does it make the sweater, the hoodie, also sacred? There is room to debate. As I said, you see the Shach is Mekel, but especially for the first reason, that when you're wearing something, you have to, as a human being, you need to go into places where you can't take Hashem's name in an exposed way. So really, I advised not to wear this garment. Okay. So then, earlier this week, someone in the New York area contacted me that one of his regular congregants has decided that she needs to have animal therapy. And so she has a dog, and she's been coming Shabbos morning to be coming to shul with her dog. At first, the dog stayed in the foyer, but it looks like the need for therapy was so great that the dog needed to come with her into the shul. And other congregants, possibly they have dogs at home, but they felt that dogs don't belong in shul. And so now he's asking me how to navigate this. So not so straightforward. And the Rebbe was asked about taking a dog, a for a blind person, that I could take a guide dog with them into shul. So he refers to in this letter to the Torah Shlema. That's written by a contemporary, Rabbi Nachum Kasher, brilliant man, encyclopedia on Torah. So he had written that you're not allowed to bring a dog into the shul, and he did not. The Rebbe says, but he did not bring a proof to his words. And the Rebbe gives a couple of references to this, and then he gives a reference. I think this is not that common that the Rebbe should refer to Igros Moshe. I don't know how often you'll see in the Rebbe's letters a reference to Igros Moshe, but meanwhile he refers to Igros Moshe, to Reb Moshe Feinstein, who says that bringing a dog into shul is not worse than bringing a donkey into shul, and he brings a proof that source that it's okay. So here the Rebbe had challenged Rav Kasher that he did not bring a proof to his objection to bringing dogs into the shul. And then Rav Kasher apparently got wind of this, probably it was referred to him, and he wrote to the Rebbe and bringing various proofs, and the Rebbe responds to those various proofs. And one of the things he brings, I didn't bring the whole letter, there is a mention about the fire which was on the Mizbeach, and at some stage it was Revutza Ka'ari, it was crouched like a lion, and then it says at another stage in history of the Beis Hamikdash, it was crouched like a dog. So the Rebbe brings, but having said all that, that's talking about a blind person who needs to have a guide dog, and I think most of us would be sympathetic to that kind of need. Here we're talking about a personal, you know, well, it does need therapy, could be, but we certainly have to also take in consideration. I told them to object on halachic grounds, not necessarily, but you can say that there are other people who feel uncomfortable, and you'd have to be sensitive to the other people, and therefore leave your dog in the foyer, etc. Someone is asking, could the sleeve not just be rolled up so that the God should be covered? That would possibly be an Eitzah. I should say it would be possibly an Eitzah because you're talking about bizoyon, and let's say if it's covered, it may not be considered kiss b'toich kiss, but the fact that it's covered is enough to take away the element of bizoyon. That might be, but again, it's practical. It's not a practical thing. You wear a garment, and every time to remember to have to roll it up. And I don't know what experience you have, Rabbi Singer, with wearing hoodies, but I don't know how easy it is to roll up the sleeve. They have usually elasticated, at the bottom of the sleeve, just near the wrist. So probably not so simple to roll them back. Okay, right. And also, there's another element is when people will see in this and will learn that this is okay, it isn't okay. It's something actually which should be discouraged. Right. Okay. Now we get to something more exciting than hoodies and dogs. Okay. Here's a bocha asking a question. Who owns the food in the yeshiva's kitchen? So, there is a breakfast time, but I'm very hungry an hour before, or supper time, doesn't matter. The cholent is meant to be served Shabbos afternoon by Shabbos meal. And it's, a mamash, I need the koiches for davening. I need to have some cholent to be able to daven. And it's my cholent in any case, but I'm going to get it earlier or later. So this is his question, kind of. The food is designated for the boys in any case. So why should it be a problem if they take it at the wrong time? So as far as I remember, there is somewhere in Igros Moshe talks about this very question, but I couldn't find it. I looked and couldn't find it. But Rav Vosner was asked this question. And so here you have in Shuvas Shevet HaLevi, where it says the following. We asked about Bochrim taking from the yeshiva kitchen without reshus, and even if the kitchen is locked. And the argument is that the bochrim mashutfim, they are partners in the funds of the yeshiva. Or perhaps no, perhaps the Rosh Hashiva is called the owner. And he says, Be'enei poshut ma'oid, that this is Gezel Gomer, it's absolute Gzela, he says. And the Rosh Hashiva is called the owner. And it is, the yeshiva has got the duty and the prerogative to apply Sdorim. And if you depart from that Seder, you're you are out of order, kind of thing. Okay. So here's very, very interesting. That's a very interesting question. The Boch is coming with the approach that the yeshiva has raised funds as income to feed the boys. So what? So this food is my food, and therefore I should be it should be legitimate for me to have it at another time because it's my food, or I can have earlier, later. And does the Rosh Hashiva actually own the food? I don't know whether even Rav Osner is saying that, but he's a trustee. There's money which has been raised, one way or the other, and he's a trustee. For what? For yeshiva. And yeshiva is a place of chinuch. And if the needs of chinuch dictate that there are going to be meal times, and cholent is served on Shabbos afternoon and not at 10:15 on Shabbos AM or whatever, so then he has a duty to use the funds at his disposal in a responsible way and not in an irresponsible way. And therefore, I can see the wisdom in that if the yeshiva sees the need, I think every yeshiva does need to implement some degree of Seder. So then they have the right to do that. And so it's not as if the Bochrim own the food in the yeshiva's kitchen. It's provided to the Bochrim within a framework of a chinuch, and therefore they have to conform to that chinuch Seder in order to be eligible to get the physical benefits from the yeshiva's funds. I'm just going to support my thought here. You have here on the bottom of the screen from Kuntras Eitz HaChaim, which is from the Rebbe Rashab, which is several years after Yeshiva Temchat Mimim was founded, and he's talking about how the Seder includes so many hours for Chassidus and so many hours for Nigla, etc. And he writes the following: you can see that we have undertaken to provide Beli Neder, to provide for all your needs, and we're absolutely happy about that, to do this, so that you should be able to be, your minds and hearts should be available to engage in Torah Avodas Hashem. But whoever doesn't conform to the notice given here about Chassidus 4 hours a day, daily, he should know he's nehena me'itonus shelei kedin. He's benefiting from the yeshiva illegally. So he doesn't say the word gezel. He does say that we've established the yeshiva for a purpose, and if you are in the yeshiva and are taking from beyond the outside the not conforming to the purpose of the yeshiva, so then it's not legal. No, it's illegitimate. It's a legitimate benefit. So I think that's would be the answer to this Boch's question. No, it's not legal, and Bochrim do not own the food in the kitchen. It's there to provide them in the right time within the framework of a yeshiva. We see Rabbi Lu writes the following: is there something in addition related to the fact that there are others who is allowed to decide how much is left after the early morning cholent? So that's another point, that there may be that these early birds may actually be depriving the latecomers. Yeah, that's true. Actually, this Bocher asked me another question. In his yeshiva, it looks like there's always leftover food. So is he allowed to give boys, take from that food to a boy who's not in the yeshiva? Or do you need to have permission? And he asked another interesting question. If you have a shop who throws out food because it's out of date, but he doesn't want people to take that food because then they're not going to buy in his shop. So can he say, "Oh, I'm making it hefker, but you mustn't, no one must take," which I don't didn't make sense to me. Once he's thrown it out, if the cats and dogs can access it, so you can't really stop humans having it. But so long as it's still in his possession, still thrown it out, he's still, let's say for whatever reason, let's say the management of the yeshiva does not want to have other people coming to the yeshiva and having meals there because they feel it's going to be disrupted to the yeshiva. So again, I think they've got that prerogative to lay down that rule, and the Bachram do not have the permission to violate that. Right. Okay. Be hirotzen that these words should reach the right destination. Okay. Let's move on. The next question was about someone who's declared bankruptcy. Is that recognized in halacha? So what you have on the screen is from the Pischei Choshen, talks about bankruptcy, where if a person does declare bankruptcy, he will be somehow they'll come to some kind of arrangement, take whatever assets he has, and it'll be distributed to the various creditors. And after that, he's now not obliged to pay those debts, the outstanding debts. Is that recognized in Alpi Torah? So he says, what exactly is this? Is this a Shora, Mechila? He goes another question. He says, do we use the concept of Dino de Malchus or Dino? Because this bankruptcy is recognized in civil law, does that make it recognized in halacha? Again, since in civil law I don't owe you any money, therefore I don't owe you any money in halacha. So here's an interesting point. When we say that concept dino de malchus dino, that's understood when it comes to taxes, etc. That's us, we as the government, if that's the right word. So we have to respect the law of the land, and if the government say that you have to pay this penalty or this for parking, whatever it may be, okay, dina de malchus dina. But when the government have said, well, when you have an internal dispute or whatever, an arrangement with someone of, and to say, well, the law of the land is that between you and you do owe money, you don't owe money. It's nothing to do with the government. It's the way the government appointed legal system will arbitrate between Reuven and Shimon. Who says that the concept of dino de malchus dino applies when there is a dispute, a monetary dispute between one yid and his neighbor? I mean, let me give a different example. If my next door neighbor who's Jewish wants to build an extension, and in civil law is allowed, does that mean that the halacha I cannot have any claim against him? If let's say, I don't think the halachas are that strict at all. But let's say in halacha he wouldn't be allowed to. In civil law he is allowed to. Would that be recognized to say, oh, he's allowed because of dino malchus? So that's the question. Finally, he says, what would happen if the lender, the creditor, recognizes that the borrower had managed to pull a fast one on the legal system, and he managed to declare bankruptcy, but really he still has assets, but he's managed to somehow keep those assets and declare bankruptcy. So he says it's not mechuyev to be moichel. The fact that you managed to work the system to acquit yourself from debts in a civil law, that doesn't mean you don't owe me the money. If in other words, if your bankruptcy isn't a genuine one, This is also not so clear, this whole story, because if it's in businesses, let's come back to the other side of it. When it comes to businesses, you could say that businesses work with idea of a limited company and limited liabilities. That's how businesses work. And therefore, when I do business with another company, another person, if it's purely in business, you could say, well, business terms include following the laws of bankruptcy, and therefore I'm part. If it's if it's a private arrangement rather than a business kind of arrangement, it seems to be harder to recognize that a bankruptcy should be a reason for total acquittal. Okay, let's move on. Now, here's a question about blowing shofar for a. So here's the story. If you go to you're going to you go to someone and you want to help them do a mitzvah, and they need to say a bracha. So we're all used to on mitzvah tefillin, you put on tefillin with them, say Baruch, Baruch, Ato, Ato. What comes to Hashem's name? Do you say Adoi, Adoi, and now say Noi, and says now say Noi? So, but really, the halacha is that you could say with the person Hashem's name in the bracha. You could say Baruch, Ato, Hashem's name. The way it is, you can say with them the bracha word for word. This is in the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch in Siman Tov Pei Daled in Hilchos Pesach, talking about going to homes to help them make a seder. And so you're not doing the seder with them. You're going to earlier or later, if they don't know how to bench after the meal. So you can recite with them the whole Berachas Hamazon word for word. It's not called a bracha in vain, because they are saying word for word after you. That would be like a teacher teaching a child, training a child to say a bracha after eating. So there's a difference. With a child, you could teach them in school, you can teach them brachas, and even though they're not eating now, that's okay, because that's with a child. With an adult, you could not teach them brachas, not live, so to speak, but when in live, in session, when they have just are about to eat or they've just eaten, with benching, etc., you're allowed to say the word and the bracha word for word with them. That's okay. And by the same token, when you're going mitzvah lulav, mitzvah shofar, mitzvah tefillin, you can say the bracha with your client word for word with Hashem's name and all. The question which I have here is, my dilemma is, when it comes to mitzvahs which a woman doesn't have a chiyuv, as in shofar, as in lulav, as in sukkah, so would these same rules apply? That like you're allowed to teach a bracha word for word whilst the person is doing the mitzvah, would that apply also when it's a voluntary mitzvah? I'm not sure whether it's got to do with arvus or Torah, or perhaps you say the other way around. Since they are allowed to say a bracha, I'm allowed to teach them the bracha. According to Minhag Ashkenaz, a woman's allowed to say a bracha, so I'm allowed to teach them the bracha. So it's more theoretical. In most cases, a woman has a little bit of knowledge, will know how to say the beginning part of a bracha, from benching lich, whatever, and then you just say Baruch Ato and continue, and then you'd say, they would say it till Habarach Ha'olam, and then you'd say with them word for word, Asher Ketsham Mitzvoseh V'Tzivanu, Leshmoa Kol Sheh. Finally, here's like an interesting thing where that about the cutting of the corner off a blanket. So in the Alter Rebbe's, now a blanket is something which is like a kind of garment, and if it's got four corners, so l'chayra it should have to have tzitzis. Yeah. So here we have the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch Yud Ches, I believe. He says cushions and sheets, even though you sometimes sleep with them during the daytime, that doesn't make it into a daytime garment because it's basically a nighttime garment. Well, that's according to Tosfos, who says it goes according to the designation of the garment, a night garment or day garment. But according to the Rambam, who says if you wear a night garment, a four-cornered night garment by day, you do need to put on tzitzis. So then you should be really putting on tzitzis on your sheets because you sleep with them in the morning as if you don't get up necessarily at dawn. And despite that, the minhag is not to put in tzitzis, whether on sheets, not whether they are sheets or blankets, whether they are wool or linen. And the reason is because some say that a blanket is not a garment. A garment you wear on your body. This is more flat over your body, and therefore that's not considered a garment as such. Others disagree with this, and therefore the Alter Rebbe concludes if it is a woolen sheet or a woolen mattress of sorts, you should make one corner round to avoid having to have tzitzis. So we have here a dilemma with a particularly a woolen garment, whether you need to cut off a corner. That's in the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch. In the Alter Rebbe's Siddur, he writes the following: a blanket. Now, here's remarkable that the Alter Rebbe, instead of talking about a sheet, is talking about a cover, and he adds another thing, which is k'sheyoshan b'yoyim. So, if in the Shulchan Aruch he said that sometimes you'll oversleep, yoshan bohem baboiker, he doesn't say that. He says k'sheyoshan b'yoyim. If you actually go to sleep with it during the day, even though mainly you'd use it for night, you should cut off a corner to make it round. So in the Siddur Habo Aleinu L'Tova, so you have a whole chapter in the Miluim about this, and to explain that this is very precise, K'sheyoshan b'yoyim. So that which you oversleep from night into day does not make that into a beged yoyim. But and even according to the Rambam, it's still a hemshich of the night. It doesn't need to have, not a question of tzitzis. If you are accustomed to taking a rest during the day and taking a rest with a blanket, and you have this blanket and it's square, then that's what the Alter Rebbe is talking about. Now, for I believe the majority of the population, Jewish population, having a rest during the day with a blanket is rare, apart from Shabbos. And Shabbos, Bichlal tzitzis is easier because you're not chayav to go and put in tzitzis on Shabbos. That's possibly, I'm trying to explain where does it come from that we're not so particular about cutting off corners of garments, which is a hemshech to the previous point, or an earlier point. The people who do cut off corners of blankets are more often than not bocherim yeshiva, and the blanket belongs to the yeshiva. And of course, in the assumption that the blanket belongs to them, but all right. So there is this chumrah of cutting off. The Alter Rebbe also, remarkably, does not differentiate. In the Shulchan Aruch, he says if it's made of a wool. In the city, it doesn't say a difference whether the blanket is made of wool. You could say stam blankets are made of wool. I don't know what was the case 200 years ago. That might be true. But he says if it's a garment which you are consciously using to go and have a sleep during the day. It could be also in the Alter Rebbe's times, people got up for Tikkun Chatzos, so therefore having a rest during the day was almost a necessity. Whereas in nowadays, less of us do Tikkun Chatzos, and therefore they're having an official siesta during the day is less common. That could be why it's not so popular, this thing of cutting off a corner. Now, let's go a little bit further on this, and that is two little stories, and this will end with. And so here's a note of the Rebbe, of the Frierdiker Rebbe. Zayin Adoration Tofresh I involved, that's 1916 in Rostov. I am amazed and I cannot restrain myself. The pure yira, pure fear, how precious is it? My father, Shlita, Rebbe Rashab, is having a haircut with a hair clippers. And sometimes when I give him a haircut with a machine, I noticed that this sheet which I gave him to wrap around, not to get soiled with the hairs which fall, before he puts on this sheet, he cuts off the corner of the sheet and made it round. And our intention was obvious. It shouldn't be a garment with four corners, and thus be chayav tzitzis. And now I understand also my question when he comes to the hotel, he doesn't use their kolderes, their blankets, and even if they're very very clean and pure, he doesn't like to use their blankets because there's in other words a concern about four corners, which is very very interesting because it's not your garment. If it belongs to the hotel, it's not yours. So therefore, why should you have to put in tzitzis in any case? A borrowed garment doesn't need to have tzitzis. Right. So that's something which I shared with also this program. I did it yesterday in Hebrew, and Rabbi Glassman of Riga sent me the following, just now published in a journal called Ginzayo. So in issue 17, just now published in Tammuz, has the following story. It's from the memoirs of Reb Itche Goldin, who was a manager of the yeshiva during the time of the Frierdiker Rebbe, and he says one time the Frierdiker Rebbe said we were in Chutz La'aretz, in other words we were abroad, and I took out from the suitcase, I took up some sheets to prepare the beds to be able to have a rest. And my father, the Rebbe Rashab, says we have to cut off a corner, but we have to ask permission by the Akeres Abayis. I think that's what his holy expression. So I answer, says the Rebbe Rayatz, he says, Baruch Hashem, this I've managed to achieve, that such issues I don't need to ask. In other words, he doesn't need to ask his wife permission to cut off the corners of the sheets. And the Rebbe said, "Sehr good," and didn't say any further. Whether he did cut off the corner or not, the Rebbe didn't tell over. But what we're seeing here is the Rebbe Rashab was particular, and it was talking about sheets even, yeah, but also not talking about wool dafka. All right, the Rebbe Rashab, we know he had his extreme Hidurim. Just finish off with one more similar story. The Rebbe Rashab, and some people will take exception to it. I'll still tell the story that the Rebbe Rashab, when he was traveling on a train, so at one stage he took on a new Kabbalah. He's going to bring his own little kettle. But at some stage he did take hot water from the controller. The conductor would go around with hot water and glasses and give people. They could buy a drink of hot water. So Rebbe Rashab threw the glass, he threw it out of the window of the train. And someone asked him, because he said, if I had brought the glass, so then it would mean I have to tovel it. I can't drink without toveling. So therefore, I threw it out of the window to confirm that I didn't buy the glass. I only bought the drink and I don't need the glass. Okay, so also not a hero l'rabim. You might get arrested for doing that kind of thing today. I wish you all a good Shabbos and inspiring Shabbos Mevorchim Elul, and we should be zoche to see Geula Hamitis Vashlemo with the sin of Mashiach Tzidkenu b'meir v'yameinu mamash.
Thank you.